The Lethal Weapon franchise is one of the most iconic action series Hollywood has ever produced, which makes it downright hilarious that almost nobody believed in the original film. Seriously, if you look at the actors who turned down the role of Martin Riggs, the role that eventually turned Mel Gibson into a megastar, you'd think half of Hollywood held a secret meeting just to say no in unison. For all sorts of reasons, Robert De Niro, Kevin Costner, Sylvester Stallone, Harrison Ford, Richard Gere, Sean Penn, Kurt Russell, Charlie Sheen, Patrick Swayze, Don Johnson, Eric Roberts, Christopher Reeve, and a whole crowd of other hot names of the 80s couldn't be bothered. Years later, all of them would be regretting this hard. Eric Roberts probably regretted it the most, considering that by the late 80s his career did a full nosedive into the straight-to-video abyss, basically becoming a permanent resident of blockbuster shelves. The only guy who never expressed an ounce of regret was Leonard Nimoy, yes, Mr. Spock. He wasn't offered an acting role. Warner Brothers actually wanted him to direct the movie. By 1987, he had already delivered 2 box office winners: Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, and Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. After Ridley Scott was rejected because of creative clashes on Blade Runner, the studio thought Nimoy could be the perfect director for Lethal Weapon. Nimoy read the script and politely tapped out, saying he simply wasn't the right person to helm a brutal, bone-crunching action film. Instead, he directed 3 Men and a Baby, which made $160 million domestically. That's one way to prove you made the right choice. Early in development, Lethal Weapon was a completely different beast. The script was written by a then-unknown kid named Shane Black, who would later write The Last Boy Scout, The Long Kiss Goodnight, and Last Action Hero. His first draft was 140 pages of pitch-black, borderline nihilistic mayhem about a cop who was absolutely, clinically unhinged. Riggs wasn't a little off. He was straight-up broken. The script featured snipers picking off children on playgrounds, helicopters exploding and crashing into crowds. Basically, the kind of stuff that would get a studio executive fired today just for reading it out loud. They even shot a toned-down playground sniper scene, but it never made the final cut. After most A-listers in Hollywood passed, Warner Brothers brought in Jeffrey Boehm, who had worked on Stephen King's The Dead Zone, to polish the script and sand off the sharpest, darkest edges. Under Boehm, Riggs mellowed out, well, relatively speaking, and the film picked up a comedic undercurrent. In the sequels, that comedic energy practically became the franchise's entire identity. And here comes one of the funniest alternate reality moments in Hollywood history, a moment no one cared about then, but looks wild now. Bruce Willis actually agreed to appear in Lethal Weapon. At the time, he was gaining popularity thanks to Moonlighting, but he wasn't overloaded with great scripts, so when Warner Brothers offered him an action film directed by Richard Donner, the guy behind The Omen and Superman, Willis said yes. Meanwhile, over at 20th Century Fox, the studio was desperately trying to cast Die Hard. Half of Hollywood had already turned down John McClane. The only person who said yes immediately was Mel Gibson. Bruce Willis was the second guy willing to do it. But Fox didn't want Willis. He was too unknown and too associated with comedy. Gibson, while not yet a superstar, still had more weight. Both films, Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, shared the same producer, Joel Silver, part producer, part Chaos Engine. Silver handed Gibson the Lethal Weapon script. Gibson read it, loved it, and instantly turned down Die Hard. As soon as Willis heard Gibson was out of Lethal Weapon, he dropped out the same day, and Fox, now panicking, suddenly considered Willis perfectly fine. And somehow nobody lost. Gibson and Willis both became megastars, and their supposedly risky action movies turned into long-running franchises that made hundreds of millions. In Shane Black's original script, the character who would become Roger Murtaugh wasn't written as black, white, or anything else. His race simply wasn't mentioned. Casting director Marion Dougherty suggested Mel Gibson and Danny Glover to Joel Silver, and she didn't care that the script described both characters as significantly older. Riggs was 40 and Murtaugh was 50. In reality, Gibson was 30 and Glover 40, which means all those iconic "I'm too old for this shit" lines were originally meant for a legit 50-year-old. The studio initially wanted Brian Dennehy as Murtaugh, but he turned it down because he'd already played cops in First Blood and FX. Shane Black wanted William Hurt as Riggs. He was the right age, but the studio rejected him. Hard to say how Hurt would have played the original ultra-dark version of Riggs, but after Boehm rewrote the script, Hurt definitely would have felt out of place. For Gibson, Lethal Weapon became the toughest prep work of his career at that point. 3 months of intense training, weekly psychologist sessions, stunt coordination, and time spent with real cops. Another stroke of casting luck was Gary Busey. According to Busey, he was about ready to quit acting entirely when his agent called and said the studio needed someone who could play a genuinely dangerous psychopath. Busey basically replied, "Say no more," and the rest is history. The role revived his career, though most of the offers he got afterward involved playing more psychopaths. Shane Black, though unhappy that his script had been heavily rewritten, agreed to write the sequel. He finished it in 6 months, but the studio and Richard Donner hated the draft. It had almost no humor, the South African villains were way crazier, and Riggs straight up died at the end. Joe Pesci's character had 2 lines and showed up in 1 scene. The studio demanded a full rewrite. Black refused, clashed with the studio, and walked away. His script was completely rewritten, leaving only the central idea about the South African consulate. Black has repeatedly said he considers his Lethal Weapon 2 script the best thing he has ever written. People have searched for it for decades, but neither he nor the studio kept a copy. It's lost forever. He was later approached to write parts 3 and 4, but he refused every time. We've talked before about the Shane Black paradox. He became the highest-paid screenwriter in Hollywood during the 90s, yet every script he wrote that became a hit was heavily rewritten by someone else. Lethal Weapon, The Last Boy Scout, Last Action, Hero, all great films. But how much of their greatness is actually Black's? Ironically, the script he was paid the most for, The Long Kiss Goodnight, and which suffered the least rewriting, is weaker than all the others. Meanwhile, Lethal Weapon 4, which didn't involve him, falls far short of the earlier films, and his fully authorial film, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, absolutely fantastic. Let me know in the comments which of these films is your favorite. When Lethal Weapon hit theaters in 1987, it blew up the box office. With a tiny $15 million budget, it made $120 million. Gibson became an instant superstar. He was so grateful to the franchise that he turned down Batman just to avoid delaying Donner's shoot for Lethal Weapon 2. It's genuinely sad that after Mel Gibson's off-screen meltdown in the late 2000s, the completed script for Lethal Weapon 5 was shelved. Richard Donner wanted to end his career with that movie after releasing 16 blocks in 2006. But thanks to Gibson going full wildfire mode, that final chapter never happened. That was Frameback. See you on the next Rewind.